The Best of Living in Iowa is funded in part by the Gilchrist Foundation. Founded by Jocelyn Gilchrist, furthering the philanthropic interests of the Gilchrist family in wildlife and conservation, the arts and public broadcasting, and disaster relief.
Funding for this program was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation. Generations of families and friends who feel passionate about the programs they watch on Iowa Public Television.
Hello, this is Morgan Halgren. For 16 seasons, Living in Iowa told the tale of what it means to be uniquely Iowan. Tonight, we honor that spirit by bringing you another glimpse into our rich heritage with a few stories from our archives. In this episode of The Best of Living in Iowa, we'll see how a rose by any other name does indeed smell as sweet. Step inside the oldest mosque in North America and visit with a World War II fighter pilot who spreads the message of overcoming prejudice.
A couple of years ago, I called a plant farm in Ohio in search of a rose bush and mentioned I was calling from Des Moines. "Oh," said the voice on the line, "Griffith Buck territory." I said, "I'm sorry, I don't know who Griffith Buck is." And she said, "You're calling me from Iowa about roses and you don't know who Griffith Buck is?" Now I know.
Someone had said that he was so mixed up in the rose business, if he would cut himself, he'd bleed roses.
Ruby Buck is talking about her late husband, Dr. Griffith Buck, whose quest for the perfect rose can be seen in the 87 varieties of roses he single-handedly developed, a collection that rose lovers from around the world refer to as Buck roses.
He wanted something that you could plant and enjoy without worrying about it being killed by the winters or bugs or things like that.
From 1949 to 1985, Iowa State was the only university in the United States with a sustained rose breeding program, and Buck was its unassuming star.
He dug very deeply into genetics and everything that you needed to know. In his work, he was reaching for beauty and for hardiness.
Ruby says that degree of dedication might have surprised at least a few residents from his boyhood home of Cincinnati, Iowa.
He was supposed to pull the weeds out of seed onions, and instead he pulled the onions instead of the weeds. So that was his beginning as a horticulturist.
Things might not have progressed from there had it not been for a requirement for his high school Spanish class. 2 unsuccessful attempts to find a Spanish-speaking pen pal left Buck leafing through books at the library.
And he found this book with pretty pictures in it, he said, on roses. And it said Pedro Dote, a Spanish hybridizer.
Spain's master hybridizer responded to Buck's request by sending his niece's address. Soon, Buck and Maria Antoinette began to correspond.
But every time she would write to him, the uncle would put in something about roses. If you grow roses, hybridized roses, you had something nobody else had ever seen.
Pedro Dote's messages must have taken root. Buck went on to get his bachelor's, master's, and Ph.D. in horticulture and microbiology from ISU as he set up his rose breeding program and began his teaching career.
He could bring me a rose, and I would think it was nice, but he'd say, well, the foliage isn't good. It had black spots, or it's got a weak neck, not enough petals. He was very critical of his own work.
And very meticulous about it. In any given year, he might have been caring for and scrutinizing 10,000 plants in different stages of development. But each year's work was carefully recorded in his own tidy script.
Here's the parentage, what he used, and then this is the number of pollinations he made, crosses, sometimes he called them.
Buck's single-minded devotion to his research did have one dramatic, unforeseen consequence. In 1955, he developed an allergy to rose pollen. His allergist offered some advice.
She had told him, well, he needed to change his hobby, and he said, it's not my hobby, it's my life. So they started making a serum for him. It had to come out of Iowa City.
For 30 years, Griffith Buck took allergy shots every 3 weeks in the winter and every 2 in the summer. It's part of the legacy that his older daughter Mary enjoys sharing with groups like these Midwest master gardeners.
This one's Country Dancer. And Dad's roses, we laugh, he had kind of his country period and his prairie period. He was looking for things that went with the Midwest.
A display at Ryman Gardens in Ames dedicated to Buck's roses reveals his affection for the Midwest, with names like Country Song, Prairie Lass, and High Neighbor. Mary often tells the stories behind the roses' names to interested gardeners, but finds that people are just as intrigued by her father's practical methods of testing for hardiness.
Plant them out in the field and let them grow. If they made it, that was fine. He had something to work with. If they didn't make it, well, too bad.
Nick Howell, garden superintendent at Ryman Gardens and one of Griffith Buck's former students, says his favorite professor was ahead of his time.
As time progressed, people still wanted roses, but they didn't have the time or the energy, really, to take care of a hybrid tea rose. And so that's when Griffith's roses really became popular. His roses aren't pretentious, they're easy to care for, they're practical, they're simple, and they're beautiful. When he was in the greenhouse working with his roses, he'd work quietly by himself, and he'd look at his roses and take pictures of his roses. It was very interesting watching him. You didn't really feel like you wanted to go up and talk to him when he was working on his roses, because he looked like he was truly at peace.
Interest in Buck and his roses has grown steadily since his death in 1991, and Ryman Gardens is making every effort to find the missing roses for their collection and to propagate more of the plants they already have. The short walk from Mary's backyard to her mother's adjoining property in Ames makes it convenient as they go about the business of preserving Buck's legacy.
Mom's done most of the correspondence when people write wanting information and things like that. Me, I'm on the propagation end, you might say. I go out and find the plant material and get it ready and send it off.
But both women wish people knew more about the man than just his roses. They wish people understood that he had weathered his share of setbacks, like the time a foreign visitor ate some seed pods Buck had spent several years working for, or the more devastating experience of discovering after his retirement that valuable plants he thought the university would save had been destroyed.
He went out and everything had been bulldozed out. He came home, and that's probably the lowest that I ever saw him.
They mention his success developing geraniums that tolerate hot Iowa nights, his flair for teaching floral design, and his willingness to judge at rose competitions around the country. But more than anything, they remember a sensitive man who picked red roses to go around his own wedding cake, delighted in making pies for his family, and marveled at his grandson. And they remember his light-hearted explanation for his lifetime's work.
Somebody asked him why he was in horticulture, and he said, well, everybody said the world was going to pot. And I figured if I was a horticulturist, I could raise something to put in the pot.
Since the tragedies of 9/11, curiosity about our Muslim neighbors and their faith has steadily grown. Unfortunately, according to an FBI report, hate crimes targeting people, institutions, and businesses identified with the Islamic faith have also increased. Producer Sarah Frasher traveled to Cedar Rapids Islamic Center and Mosque to gain a better understanding of Iowa's Muslim community.
Hassan Igram is a businessman, husband, father, and first-generation Iowa-born Muslim of Lebanese descent.
It starts with the belief in God and belief in the hereafter. Belief in one God and belief that Muhammad is his messenger is a pretty simple concept. But all the things that come along with that are really what builds the character of a Muslim and gives us a routine that we follow that keeps our spirituality in check.
Shadia Igram, Hassan's daughter, is a political science major at the University of Iowa.
To me, Islam is built of these very basic parts: humbleness, modesty, generosity, just more or less to be just to make your life very, very simple and to use what God has given you. God has given you a mind. Therefore, if you take away all outside influences and just use your common sense, you're going to pick more or less the right choice. That's to me what it is to be a Muslim. And then you have your community, which just helps you further that.
Miriam Ammer, wife and mother and media specialist, is a fourth-generation Arab American Muslim.
Our reward comes in the hereafter. So the Quran tells us that we have to, not partake in certain things, and we have to practice our religion by doing our prayers 5 times a day and giving the alms to the poor and fasting during Ramadan. These are all forms of getting closer to God. And that's the practice of Islam, basically.
Writer Carly Karras was raised a Catholic. She converted to Islam in October 2001.
In the Bible, you read the Old Testament, and God is vengeful, and you don't mess with him. You do something wrong, you're going to pay for it. You go to the New Testament, and you could do something and ask for forgiveness, and everything's fine. So it was like there's 2 extremes, and there wasn't directions on how your life should be. What you should do, what you should eat, what you shouldn't eat, what you should drink, not drink, where, who you talk to, things like that. And then in Islam, it's all spelled out for you. You just follow the book.
We spoke with Hassan, Shadia, Carly, and Miriam at the Cedar Rapids Islamic Center and Mosque. There has been a congregation in Cedar Rapids since the 1930s. Today, its members represent about 30 different nationalities. We attended a Friday prayer service in the summer, then returned in November for an evening meal during the holy month of Ramadan, when Muslims break their daily fast. We went to learn about what it means to be a Muslim in America. What comes first, being a Muslim or being an American? The answer from all was being Muslim.
Make no bones about that. Because ultimately you're not answerable to President Bush or President Clinton or whoever came before or whoever is going to come after you. You're answerable to God. Doesn't mean you don't follow the laws of the United States. You do. But as long as those laws can coexist with the laws of Islam.
What if they conflict?
Well, the only way they could conflict is if something is outlawed. For example, we're forced to do something. We're forced to eat pork. We're forced to drink alcohol.
There may be no religious conflicts for American Muslims. Still, this country is grounded in the separation of church and state. There are Muslim countries governed by Islamic law, and those laws seem harsh by Western standards. But Hassan Igram says his religion embraces basic human rights and the same moral values embodied in the American Constitution.
A lot of Muslim scholars, people that know the Quran by heart, that understand Islamic law, will tell you that the United States in many ways is more of a Muslim country than Muslim countries are.
Absolutely. My husband's a new American. He became a citizen about 5 years ago after having lived here for quite a number of years. He carries a copy of the Constitution in his pocket because he feels that it is the only document of all the nations that allow him to practice his religion more freely. And that's one of the things that he loves about America. He's able to practice his religion here without any kind of constraint. It guarantees him that right.
Political institutions are one thing. America's social culture is another. The believers sharing this Ramadan potluck can find themselves challenged by America's popular culture, its permissiveness, its sexual ethics, its materialism. If Muslims perceive Islam as spiritually richer, and for lack of a better term, the West or the modern world as superficial and decadent, you're Muslims. How can you be comfortable living in this culture?
That's our jihad.
Explain that, please.
Personally, I think jihad is a very important part of a Muslim's life, and it does not mean that I think that we should all be waging a holy war against the infidels or anything of that sort. But I do feel that I am fighting a jihad with America, living here. For instance, the things that this society takes for granted that they deem as normal behavior is un-Islamic. And for me to overcome that, that would be a jihad. For instance, the style of dress, the style of clothing that women wear in this country. It's very hard for me to go shopping and find clothes that are Islamically correct.
Muslims want to be part of society, but it is difficult for somebody that's growing up as a high school or college student that can't date, that can't go to prom, that can participate in some activities and can't participate in other activities. It's tough. It's tough. Christians say the same thing about the society.
American culture also seems at odds with Islamic culture when it comes to women's role. Many Western women believe Islam subjugates women, an oppression exemplified in the way Muslim women dress. But it is important to note, not all Muslim women in the world dress the same. Culture plays a large part, and there is individual choice. For example, Shadia Igram does not wear a scarf outside the mosque, but for modesty's sake, she does not wear things like shorts either. Modesty is the Islamic issue, and it is a matter of self-respect, not subjugation.
Islam was the first women's movement, 1,500 years ago. Before feminism, before suffrage, before any of that, Islam was there.
Explain that a little more.
Well, if you looked at the way women were treated prior to the rise of Islam, you had, a lot of times when families would have a baby and it was a girl, they would kill it, they would bury it alive, because that was just another burden on the family. Women had no rights, they had no say, they had no education, they were sold off to their husband or to another family as slaves. They were just an extra burden. Islam came in and totally changed that.
I mean, men and women in Islam are equal. We just have different roles. It's the man's job to get out there and work and earn the money to take care of the family. It's the woman's job to stay home and nurture the children and take care of them. We can have our own money. We can have a job. It's encouraged for us to have an education, our own property. What's wrong with that?
Though it sometimes seemed this group was surprised at some of our questions, they also understood that there is considerable misunderstanding between Islam and the West, and the ignorance goes both ways. So with all the misconceptions, what did they want us to know about them?
I would say that I'm the same as you. I just choose to live my life a little bit differently, and that's it. That's the only difference.
No, I would say that, yeah, we share a lot of the same beliefs and goals and fears and happiness and all that.
I was born and raised in Iowa, of course, and I've had the opportunity, or I have the opportunity to live anywhere I want. And I choose to live here because I love the state, I love the city, I love the people. I love driving through the cornfields in the afternoon.
We have families, we have homes, we have jobs, we're good neighbors, we're good citizens, we vote, we take care of each other. We're the same. I mean, our religion is different, but, we share the same wants and likes and dislikes and pain that they feel. I mean, when 9/11 happened, we cried. I mean, it broke our hearts. We still grieve for all those people that died, and we'd like to see justice done. But just because we're Muslim, don't take it out on us.
Over 50 years have passed since the end of World War II, and now each month 30,000 veterans of that war pass away, taking with them the dramatic accounts of their wartime experiences. Jerry Yellen of Fairfield hopes that doesn't happen to his story. It's one with a surprise ending that has sent him on a mission armed with the powerful message that it's possible to love your enemy. Be advised that some of the images in this feature are graphic depictions of war.
When a young Jerry Yellen was bombing Japan during World War II, he felt justified and sometimes almost elated. He couldn't have known then that he was bombing the future homeland of his very own grandchildren.
It is an unusual experience to speak to your enemy. I feel fortunate because of my children. My children opened this opportunity up for me. I would have been one of those closed-minded persons all of my life about the Japanese people. I truly hated them for what they did and what I thought that they stood for.
Growing up, Jerry was the product of a society where hatred for the Japanese was commonplace. Emotions he explains to these Fairfield 8th graders.
My personal dislike for the Japanese began when I was in the 8th grade.
He faced this enemy in war, and then one day in peace. His journey started in 1942, shortly after his 18th birthday.
Who was the Jerry Yellen who in 1944 went off to Iwo Jima?
He was a young man who was very much an American. In 1941, the dislike that I had for the Japanese turned to deep anger, as everyone in the United States became angry, and I couldn't wait to get in to fight for my country.
Jerry lives with images that will forever haunt him.
Dead Japanese bodies, and the smell, and the sight, and the maggots, the American Marine mortuary, seeing my friends, and as I see them as young men, and flying alongside of you, and then they're gone.
When World War II came to an end, Jerry never spoke a word of the war, and amazingly, no one ever asked about it. The silence was finally broken in 1981 when Jerry went to the movie Platoon, a devastating story about ground soldiers in Vietnam. Oddly enough, this war film was the beginning of Jerry's healing.
I had never cried about the war. I had never thought about the Japanese or the Vietnamese as human beings. And when I saw them being bulldozed into this mass grave, it gave me time to slow down and to think for the first time, really, about what the war was and how it affected me.
Shortly thereafter, he was asked to go to Japan for business, and reluctantly he went. The journey provided him an opportunity to make new friends and engage in soul-searching conversations with people from a country he had loathed. He recalls talking with one man by the name of Yash Takasui.
He opened my eyes to what we had done and what other human beings have done in war. And it seems at that point that everything that I hated about the Japanese, I could find something that we did in America that was equally as devastating to another group of people. And I found for me that if war is to kill, then the pure purpose of life for me is to connect all human beings and to everything in nature.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I just, I've done it as we have had the experiences.
Mm-hmm.
While in Japan, Jerry's wife Helene felt intuitively that their youngest son Robert would appreciate the Japanese connection to nature and their tranquil lifestyle, things that Jerry and Helene would also incorporate into their own lives. When Robert graduated from college, their gift to him was a trip to Japan. Robert liked the country so much that 15 years later, he is still there.
In 1987, we went for a visit, and on that visit, he told us he was going to get married. And I was stunned. It never occurred to me that he would marry a Japanese woman. And the thoughts that went through my mind was, it's his life, it's not my life. I fought the war. I wouldn't object, but I couldn't give him an answer at that moment. And so what I said to him was, what kind of support are you going to get from Takako's father? That's Takako's father, and that's his only picture that he has in the military.
Takako feared they would never get her father Taro's permission because he fought in the war for Japan and hated the Americans. When he spoke to Robert, he spoke only of Robert's father and what he did in the war. However, it was for that very reason that Taro finally agreed to the marriage.
Mr. Yamakawa said to himself that any man who flew a P-51 against the Japanese and lived must be a brave man. And he wanted the blood of that man to flow through the veins of his grandchildren. And he didn't say anything to Robert and Takako, but he went home and he told his wife to take Takako and make arrangements for the wedding. So he hated the Americans and I hated the Japanese. And today, we have 3 grandchildren in Japan. The only difference is that he responds to the grandchildren when they say Oji-san, and I respond when they say Grandpa. And he's as gleeful about it as I am.
After returning from the wedding, something inspired Jerry to start writing about his life. It compelled him to write a book called Of War and Weddings and to share his story with schools around the world.
I woke up early on in Robert's marriage with a nightmare that his children in Japan would one day have to fly and fight against my other grandchildren in America. And that I could see the planes passing in the sky, one coming from one direction and one coming from another direction. And I said to myself, I can't let that happen. I never had a conversation with him about...
As Jerry talks to the students, they may not understand at first why they're getting a lesson on humanity. But it doesn't take long for them to realize that this veteran sitting among them is living proof of how we must all face our own prejudice.
So we have images and stereotypes of what people are, but they're all people, if we can meet them as people.
At age 75, Jerry has found peace. Peace in knowing that he's making a difference in the lives of young people, so that maybe, just maybe, the young men and women of tomorrow won't be forced to fight in a war they don't understand against a people they don't know.
The one letter that means more to me than any is from a young man who said, "Dear Mr. Yellen, thank you for coming to my class." He said, "It took you 50 years to learn that all people were the same, and you taught that to me in one class, and I'll never have to worry about that again in my life." And that moved me deeply.
The Best of Living in Iowa is funded in part by the Gilchrist Foundation. Founded by Jocelyn Gilchrist, furthering the philanthropic interests of the Gilchrist family in wildlife and conservation, the arts and public broadcasting, and disaster relief.
Funding for this program was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation. Generations of families and friends who feel passionate about the programs they watch on Iowa Public Television.